Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
So I saw on the intertubes that a picture of you holding a big nest of hair.
Yes.
And I thought you'd gone back to the way it was, but I'm looking at you and it's not the way it was. You're still hippie Matt.
No, it's definitely shorter, right? I mean,
it's shorter, but you know,
I think I could
bring you to meet my parents the way you're looking right now.
I think I could here. How about this? If I sort of try to tame it and slick it down, this is more professional, right?
I mean, I guess.
Bill, there's no going back to the way things used to
be. And this is all okay in the household. This is not causing any tension with your spouse.
Are you suggesting that it should? Do you mean the fact that I cut it, or the fact that I haven't cut it? Like
that you haven't cut it
short enough. Oh, my wife's totally cool. The tension is with everyone else.
So in conservative circles.
Yeah.
This is still making a bit of a black sheep. I mean, you already were kind of a black sheep as it was.
It's weird. I'm astounded by how much people care, but not inside the house. This is
in your church community.
No one has said anything, but
But do you see the side eyes?
I think when I had long hair, it was perceived that I was like, not part of the flock, as it were. Bill, you got to realize my hair was a lot longer than it is now.
Yes.
I had a lot of haircut.
You look more like, 90s skate punk now, as opposed to 80s hair metal band.
Well, I guess I'm slowly catching up to modernity. Maybe a couple more rounds and I'll be back to the 21st century.
So what's on your mind this week?
Well, I have to say, the thing that's most on my mind is this new slur that, I call it a slur that some on the right are using now. And the reason it's on my mind is because I weighed in on this yesterday on Twitter, and the slur is groomer. And so, as you know, Bill, there's a Florida bill which has been. And this is here's an example of the left.
I thought it was signed, right? Didn't DeSantis sign it?
Yeah, it's a law that the left has called "Don't Say Gay."
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a misrepresentation of the bill, but it's more within the bounds, I think, of normal politics than people who are opposing that law or who oppose that bill for whatever reason.
Why do you think it's an unfair characterization?
Well, okay, the bill does not say anything about saying gay. Don't say gay suggests that if you say the word gay, or if you say you're gay, that you are violating the law, and that's not in the text of the law.
So the text is classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3, or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. And
some people have suggested that would have a slippery slope, or it could be interpreted misapplied to punish, like a gay teacher who says, "Hey, I just got married."
Well, DeSantis said in the press conference when he was signing it, teaching kindergartners that, quote, they can be whatever they want to be, unquote, was, quote, inappropriate, unquote, for children. Quote, it's not appropriate. It's not appropriate for any place, but especially not in Florida. I don't think he's been to Florida, Matt. I don't think DeSantis knows what Florida is.
Well, maybe just not south of Orlando, although Disney is now embroiled in this too. The word, Bill, I don't know if I said it, the term is groomer. And if you oppose this law. And there are people who are conservatives who oppose the law. They just feel like it was written too broadly. But even not only if you oppose the law, if you oppose using the term groomer, you are called a groomer. And if you oppose the law, it is said that you are, pro-groomer. Maybe you're not one yourself. Now, as you know, Bill, grooming means to clean or brush something. That's the literal definition.
Mm-hmm.
For everyone else, colloquially, it's thought of that you are basically, preparing someone, getting ready to attempt to have sex with someone, usually someone underage. So I think that what's happening is that people on the right now on Twitter I call it a slur.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's certainly an escalation in harsh rhetoric. And we've seen the term cuck thrown around. I mean, ironically, Bill, a lot of, we saw what happened with Jerry Falwell Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And now with the whole groomer thing, people are talking about Roy Moore and Matt Gaetz, who have been accused of things like it is kind of ironic. God bless you. That this is coming from the right, but they seem to be obsessed. You saw probably the other day Marjorie Taylor Greene called Mitt Romney and Collins and whoever else is going to vote for Ketanji Brown Jackson a pre-pedophile or pro-pedophile or something like that. Whatever the case would be, they are using incredibly harsh rhetoric against political adversaries. And I think they're doing it in a way that they can hand wave it away as like, hey, man, we're just, it's like, hey, boomer, hey, groomer, we're just trolling. This is hyperbolic. Well, I mean, words mean things, and they're trying to redefine it when convenient and weaponize it when convenient.
So I just want to fully understand your position here, and I'm not trying to trap you. I don't want to get into an argument about the bill or anything. But do you support the Florida bill, but don't like the way advocates are using it as a weapon with the groomer slur? Or are you also against the bill too?
Well, so first, Bill, as you know, I live in a red state and specifically send my kids to a Christian school. That is how much I care about indoctrination and their, values and worldview and all of that. I saw someone on Twitter today said, it's interesting that people who literally think teachers are trying to groom their children want to pass a law to keep them from saying certain things, but they're still okay with sending them to spend time with these groomers for 7 hours a day. I'm not willing to take that chance, Bill. To your question, I think there are, this is a really tough one. And I think there's competing things at play here. And Bill, there are instances in Florida, in fact, where kids have had some sort of, questions about their gender. They're not sure. And teachers or administrators will start talking to them about transitioning without, and specifically keeping this from the parents. So I would clearly have a problem with that. This idea that we're not going to bring it, your parents don't need to know, we're not going to tell, I would obviously have a problem with that. I guess the question I have is, and there are people who say that this law was written too broadly, that it could in fact ensnare people who are just gay and are not in any way trying to propagandize any sort of lifestyle. I honestly do not think it's appropriate to talk to someone else's first grader, second grader, third grader about sex, or to talk to them about transitioning, especially if you're keeping it from the parent. Having said that, I wouldn't want to somehow criminalize a gay teacher. And so these, I think that these are there is a tension here.
So it sounds like you, in theory, would be more comfortable with a more narrowly written bill.
I guess, again, I'm comfortable with sending my kids to a Christian school and moving to a red state. That is what I have done, because I actually, no, you could argue that that because I've done that I am actually out of touch and I don't have skin in the game of the culture war because I've checked out of it, right? Mm-hmm. Or you could argue I'm actually living my values, actually care more about it than people who are, again, sending their kids to spend 7 hours a day with people they're convinced are grooming them. Whatever the case may be, I mean, politics is messy. These issues are very difficult and complex. But here's what I do know, Bill, and this is the point that I'm making, is that words matter. And it's not right to call people groomers just because they oppose this particular bill or law in Florida. That is not cool. I mean, that is a very heavy charge. Words mean things. They're attempting to redefine what these words mean, and they're hurling it promiscuously at even conservatives. So that's my point here is okay, about.
Let me shift towards more about conservatives broadly and less about Matt Lewis. Why do you think conservatives are leaning in? I kind of get why conservatives would shift towards a focus on transgender rights issues, because they lost the gay rights, battle with the gay marriage ruling at the Supreme Court several years ago. And the typical culture war cycle is that progressives try to push on another frontier to expand rights and discuss equality for a marginalized group, and you get a conservative backlash, a reactionary response to that, and that's where your new culture war battlefront is. Like that, I get, but it feels like there are conservatives who still want to relitigate, not just litigate the transgender debate, but go back to the gay rights debate. It doesn't seem like the most solid turf to wage culture war battle on, but there seems to be just a difficulty to restrain themselves. It's almost if it doesn't matter if they win or lose, because they're just very committed to fighting that fight. What is your sense of why they're picking these fights?
Whole bunch of reasons. And I do think that, as you noted, at least in describing the perception that we have, that the left is constantly pushing for more change. There's never enough. We've never arrived. There's always has to be another group that previously was out of the mainstream that we're going to now normalize, and new activity. And so if you're trying to conserve traditional values, it never stops. You're going to constantly be fighting off the left, who's trying to themselves redefine things. So that's part of it. I also think that the whole Donald Trump phenomena gave rise to a whole bunch of people on the right. Some of them, remember Donald Trump was in a way very pro-gay, but I think that his success helped kind of embolden some folks on the right who are fans of his, the way that he fights against the left. In many ways, they're actually bigger fans of Ron DeSantis, I think, and Viktor Orban are probably their two heroes more than Trump, to be honest with you, because Trump was kind of chaotic and not that actually good at winning culture war fights. Whereas I think that they basically want to impose. They believe that the liberal project has failed, and they've really given up on liberalism. And what they want to do is basically say, like, Christian conservatives need to actually impose our values on other people, on the common good. And so I think that Donald Trump kind of awakened and emboldened them. And now they've kind of moved past Trump to Orban and DeSantis. Like, I think that's part of it. A lot of them really are true believers. And then I would also say that disinformation also plays a role in this. There's a side of this that, QAnon started with Pizzagate, like the sense that child trafficking is really pervasive and that progressives and liberals are engaged in these heinous activities all the time, like in a Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria or whatever that place was called in DC. So I think that there's a perception that this is much more like widespread than I'm guessing it is. And I'm here I'm talking about like the indoctrination even. And so I think if you add these things together, like, yes, the left really is bad. The left really is, the woke left really are pushing some weird stuff. Donald Trump kind of gave, reason to believe that people who were heretofore, previously outside of the political mainstream now have, power. And then I also think that the rise of conspiracy theories plays into it. So it's like a very complicated thing.
Well, on the conspiracy front, I feel like during the gay rights debate, people would throw out grooming type charges. Gays shouldn't be able to adopt children. Gays shouldn't be teachers. Gays shouldn't be Boy Scout leaders. There's all those sorts of discussions, and I feel like we got to a place where most people understood that homosexuality is something that you're born with, and you really can't turn somebody gay. And so acceptance of gay adults in roles where they are with children became not controversial. Now you have this rise of QAnon that charges a global elite with being pedophiles. And it seems to have made it a lot easier for charges of pedophilia to be thrown out in a political context. So we can talk about how that's affected the Ketanji Brown Jackson process. But do you think that there's a QAnon element to this push, to the Florida bill and other things like that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's definitely part of it. I think that there's several things happening here, and that one of the things is this paranoia. I would say, Bill, I do believe that you could take someone who maybe is gay, or maybe I'm talking about a young person here who may be gay, or maybe just confused, maybe is a tomboy, what we used to call a tomboy, and whatever. It's a whole spectrum, but teachers start talking to you about, like, maybe you're actually the opposite gender. Have you thought about the power of suggestion? Whatever the reason being, the number of, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but it just seems like the incidence of people who are trans, the statistics have dramatically jumped. And some of it may be that they just feel more empowered. And some of it may be that, like, they're being indoctrinated, or people who are just confused are being persuaded that it's not just confusion, or maybe they're not just gay, but in fact, they are trans. So this is to say that, I always think, like, whenever there's like a school shooting, people say, well, like, obviously there's too many guns, but video games and movies have nothing to do with this, because, and I'm like, well, okay, that's reductionist. There are going to be a whole bunch of things at play, right? And like, there's a reason why people spend millions of dollars running TV ads, and it's because persuasion and, like, advertising, pushing an agenda or a product does work at some level. You can get X number of people to change. And I would say, like, the same thing here. Like, I do think that over time, if you are, if your kids are exposed to ideas, whether it's like a violent movie or pornography or a political agenda, whatever it is, there can be a toll. And if you're a traditional conservative who has Christian values, you might want to focus on what your kids are being told or being exposed to, and that's TV as well. This goes to the whole Disney thing. But anyway, that's a long way. Let me circle back to your specific question. Like I said, I do believe that there are a whole bunch of things at play here, but clearly one of them is this conspiracy theory mindset. We saw it, with Josh Hawley's attack on Judge Jackson. We've seen it with Marjorie Taylor Greene's attack on Mitt Romney. And I think we're seeing it with the groomer slur as well.
Just to get back to what you were saying just before that point, what's always challenging with public school. Public school is a place where kids from all backgrounds go to. All communities have a legal obligation to educate all children. So you can opt out and go to private schools, in some cases charter schools, but the public school can't reject people. And so you get people from households with vastly different religious views, political views, sexual orientations, et cetera. And, so it's unavoidable that some kind of socialization occurs where your child is at for, 6 hours or more a day. And the teacher has to, it's hard for the teacher to say nothing. If you have a kid there who is transgender, who is asking to be called they, you can't just close your eyes and pretend it's not going on. It's in the school. So these cultural conflicts are bound to occur in a public school setting. And from my perspective, I'm in a community where, and I've seen state data on this. So we have a higher percentage of self-identified transgender children in our school system because there is much greater acceptance of that here than a lot of other places. And I know there are people in trans families who would say that it's not idyllic and there's still bigotry and whatnot. So I'm not trying to argue that everything is all hunky-dory, but we certainly have it's only talked about more. That's certainly more accepted here, and there's more kids that identify that way. And I know transgender kids who, by all I can account for, that is who they are. They weren't indoctrinated. It wasn't imposed upon them. They took the lead and said, "Hey, this is who I am," and their parents have been accepting of it, and it's healthy for them to be in an accepting setting. It's not healthy to say I am this, and everyone around you says, "No, you're not." That's not a great place to be. So from that perspective, it's really hard to hear the counter argument. I don't want this talked about in school because I don't want my kid indoctrinated. It's going to have an impact on the kid who is saying openly, "This is who I am." If the messages around them is "there's something wrong with you," that's very dangerous. And people talk about how there's higher suicide rates with transgender kids. The only point I'm trying to make here is that it's inevitable that there's going to be public school culture war conflict, which is really unfortunate because that's not really, I don't think anyone really wants their kids to be in the middle of a culture war. They want their kids to have a healthy environment for education. And the only way I think you get out of it is with more science. When it was sort of, we grew up in the 80s, the discussion around homosexuality in the 80s was not nearly as healthy as it is today. And it really wasn't until there was hard science that you can be genetically born as homosexual, that there was more understanding. that it wasn't a choice. That made it a lot easier, I think, for people to accept it. And maybe with the science around transgender identity might need to evolve a lot more before we get to that level of acceptance.
It's possible. I think I've become jaded about the idea that things are going to get better, to be honest with you. I think I was just as, this sort of fits the pattern of like being a tech utopian, hoping that Twitter and Facebook will actually give us more of a voice and democratize things, and things will be better. It actually ended up worse. I really naively assumed that race relations were going to get better. If you would ask me in high school, what do I think the world, like in 20 years, what will America be like? I would have bet that race relations would have been better. Not so sure that actually is the case. And I think the same thing here. And look, this is fueling, there's a sense that you have kind of like secular, highly educated elites who are pushing their values on the rest of us. And this is a global thing. I mean, and of course, there's a lot of things mixed up in it, including immigration as well. But Orban's victory in Hungary, there's a chance Le Pen was going to win in France. I don't see this going away, because this is a clash of visions, and I really think that the Governor Cox out there in Utah is trying to find a way to be really ironic and understanding, and in Utah has actually done a better job than most of America at finding like compromises that are compassionate to deal with these divisive issues. But I think we've gotten to a point where it's kind of mutually exclusive. If you were going to be an Orthodox Christian, it is it's countercultural now. And that's one of the reasons. And again, I do believe there's a lot of paranoia and misinformation. But this is one of the reasons that I think a lot of conservatives are like convinced that like the left is coming after us, and that they're going to send us to Gitmo, and they're going to debank us like they did the truckers up in Canada, debanking. And there's a movement of people to go crypto and to homeschool. And there's even, to move away from a city, maybe start a little garden, it's kind of a hippie, crunchy thing to a certain degree. But like, so there's a question like, do you kind of check out?
And you're halfway there.
I'm halfway there. Or do you like stay and fight? And that's where, I try to be like sympathetic to both sides, including the people on the left and on the right that I don't agree with. And I mean, I think there's a way of looking at this that says like, hey, Matt, not everyone has the luxury of being able to do what you did. And we are, these are my kids. What would you do if like if you were afraid people were like coming to your kids and saying, hey, like, we're not going to tell your dad, but I think it's time that we start some hormone therapy. You know what I mean? It's what some people are afraid of.
Let me shift to the Jackson confirmation, which is imminent. The final vote's expected for tomorrow. We have 53 senators in favor, including 3 Republicans. But at the front end of this process, it seemed like Republicans overall were not going to raise too big a fuss. The New Democrats had the votes, and they didn't necessarily want to make the first African-American woman Supreme Court justice a point of controversy. And I think this is also in part of the Republicans saying, hey, we're already on a great path to winning these midterms. We don't need to do anything that's going to get in the way. So just and plus this nomination doesn't change the balance of the court at all. It's a liberal replacing a liberal, whatever. We're 6-3. We already got this thing, whatever. Let them have their judge. But then once the hearings began, and Josh Hawley pushed the you're soft on child sex crimes argument, which then Lindsey Graham, supercharged. Then Ted Cruz came in with the CRT attack, holding up books that are used in the private school that she's on the board of. That seemed,
but some of that stuff's also taught to Ted Cruz's daughters.
At
an elite,
right? I mean, Ted Cruz's kids go to a school that has like an anti-racist mission statement, and Hawley and others have voted for conservative judges that have had similar sentencing records when it comes to child sex crime. So it's all hypocrisy. But it's and I don't want to paint too broad a brush. I think there are a lot of Republicans whose statements are, "Hey, she's a great person. We disagree on judicial philosophy." They're not everybody is hammering her as a pedophile sympathizer, but enough are that got into the media bloodstream and actually has colored, tainted the process. Do you feel that and Graham's sort of an interesting case because Graham was the guy who used to always say, "Hey, elections have consequences. I don't agree with Sonia Sotomayor on everything. I don't even care." She said had the wise Latina comment. I'm still going to vote for her, and he did for Kagan as well. Now he's made this shift. Do you think that those Republicans made an error in smearing her in this way? Or does Graham have a legitimate point? Hey, you guys were mean to Kavanaugh. You guys were mean to Amy Coney Barrett. So I'm not going to be nice to your people anymore.
No, I don't think we should smear people. I don't think what Josh Hawley did was fair. I do think, look, this is a lifetime appointment. Someone said it's the last job interview she'll ever give. So I think tough questions are fair. You could press her on sentencing even. I just think that Hawley went too far with the way he tried to, again, insert this hot button. That's not right. This, insinuation into it.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Right.
I mean, you can ask the question. Like, I think it's fair to look at the record and ask a question about it. That's different than having a leading question.
Well, and Hawley did this Twitter thread, which was like insinuating that why is she soft on child predators?
Right.
That kind of thing.
Right.
So I think it's fair to talk about her sentencing. I think all that's legit. In fact, I would probably vote for her. I would probably vote against her. Just like Lindsey Graham. And I think it's because I don't think it's, Lindsey used to believe that if a president nominated someone who was like qualified, experienced and qualified and competent, that by and large you should vote to confirm that judge. But that's kind of an old-fashioned idea. And in fact, most liberals do not hold to that either. I mean, in the U.S. Senate, I think ideology matters. I think judicial philosophy matters. And so, Ben Sasse, who I no longer like, but Ben Sasse did get some flack for basically saying a lot of great things about, Judge Jackson and then saying he would vote against her. I don't think that those two things are like necessarily inconsistent.
Well, what I find highly ironic is, Republicans and conservatives have been mad at Democrats in regards to the judicial confirmation process ever since Robert Bork. And the Robert Bork hearings were about his judicial philosophy. He wasn't attacked for sexual misconduct. They talked about he had a very narrow view of how far for the First Amendment goes, what kind of speech it protects. He had an essay in the 60s that was critical of the Civil Rights Act, which he, partially disavowed, but it's still part of his paper trail. And it was one of the big thing that's escaped me. But the point is that they were looking at his record. They're looking at his judicial opinions. They're looking at his essays, looking at the positions he's taken, and asking him how this would apply to your how you would behave on the court. And he engaged in that discussion. He didn't do the "I can't answer that" kind of thing. So perhaps to his detriment. But he was defeated, and not even filibuster. He was defeated on an up or down vote. 6 Republicans joined 52 Democrats and just beat him. And that was a shift to where how a lot of these judicial nominations were treated, because judicial philosophy was put front and center, in part because he had a very, unique, idiosyncratic, and some would say extreme judicial philosophy. Now, and you look at what Graham said on the floor of the Senate just last week, because he's lumping in every grievance you could possibly have into that speech. The leading complaint these days is, you guys are mean to Kavanaugh. You guys took this non-credible sexual misconduct charge and tried to smear his reputation. Now, I would say the Christine Blasey Ford allegation was a credible one. You may not be able to say that's like definitively proven in a court of law, but I think a credible one. Maybe the Julie Swetnick charge was not as credible, but the Blasey Ford was. And I think you could argue that her charge was credible, but not necessarily disqualifying, because he was a drunk teenager at the time. And there's no pattern of sexual misconduct as an adult, but that's a whole separate discussion. But anyway, I'm going down too many paths here. My point is, Graham...
Bill Scher thinks it's okay for drunken teenager Brett Kavanaugh.
Graham starts with those things, and he says in the speech, we questioned Jackson about her record. We didn't bring in all this personal stuff. We questioned about her record, and we challenged her judicial philosophy. So we're better than you guys are because we did that. But the reason why Republicans were mad in the first place is that Democrats brought judicial philosophy into the mix in the first place. And when you try to defeat a nominee based on sexual misconduct, you're not talking about judicial philosophy. If Democrats beat Kavanaugh, it's not like they would get the seat for themselves. Trump would still appoint someone more conservative than Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh was the most conservative person he could have chosen. Could very easily have gotten a more harder right nominee.
Well, Bill, I wrote, and I angered some of my friends on the right when I did this, but I wrote, we may want to consider Mike Lee. This was once the attacks on Brett Kavanaugh started. I actually wrote a piece at The Beast that said, okay, let's think about Mike Lee. And a lot of people were mad at me on the right because they felt like that's, appeasement, feeding a crocodile hoping he eats you last kind of thing. But I was like, Mike Lee is probably squeaky clean in terms of personal conduct. And it would have been an interesting, my friend Brian Lundy, who's a smart strategist, former head of the DCCC, I think, and then he became a Democrat for Bush. But he says that abandonment is the most underrated political weapon. That a lot of times if people are under attack, if they would just abandon it and do something else, that it would really work. So there's different strategies or different arguments for what would work. But again, Mike Lee would have been an interesting counter move.
Well, and of course, Amy Coney Barrett could have been put up at that point too. Trump,
that's what I wanted, but then I think, in fairness to Trump, saving her to replace RBG, since it did work out that way, it did work out for the best, I think.
Well, Republicans got all of their judges.
But I mean,
they control the court to an extreme degree.
But think of it. Okay, but think of it this way. I thought Biden should have appointed the. I'm sorry, her name escapes me, but the South Carolina
child.
Okay, I thought Biden should have appointed her, or Biden should have nominated her this time. But if Biden gets a second bite at the apple, he's not going to have a strong. The Senate may not be as progressive whenever that happens, and so that might be a better second pick for Biden.
Just have a macabre hypothetical. Clarence Thomas was just in the hospital. Let's say Clarence Thomas actually died while Democrats controlled the Senate, and Biden picks Childs. What does Graham do then? He's going to all of a sudden say, "Oh, well, I sure liked Childs before when it was replacing a Democratic nominee, but now it's a whole other story. Hey, was she soft on a child predator?"
No, okay, so Bill, I think this theoretical or hypothetical case, what if it happened after Republicans take the Senate by one vote?
We know Republicans take the Senate, the Democrats get nothing. Democrats, no matter who the hell it is, Democrats get nothing.
But okay, but I think the Graham's vote now, if Clarence Thomas died tomorrow, what Graham does wouldn't be as consequential. But if Clarence Thomas dies a year from now, and Republicans have 51 senators, what Lindsey Graham does, and Tim Scott, by the way, who also said he would vote for supported Trump.
Not necessarily, because the nominees got to get to the floor.
No, fair point, right? The Judiciary Committee.
But
Lindsey Graham's on that committee, right?
We know how Republicans will react because they did it. They did it in 2016. Mitch McConnell said, on the day Scalia died, Mitch McConnell said, you don't get to fill this seat.
Okay, but McConnell also said it was an election year.
Yeah, and that standard's going to hold.
I'm just saying that you very well may be right that McConnell would then, reverse engineer a new principle. But according to the original principle, it was, because Scalia died in an election year.
The new principle is you guys were mean to Brett Kavanaugh, now you get nothing. That is the new principle. And this is also what Graham missed and others will miss in all this. I mean, I'm not arguing that you should get the smear reputations willy-nilly. I'm not justifying that, but I don't think that's what Democrats were trying to do. They were trying to set a standard for sexual misconduct, even if it meant Republicans getting a different judge that was still very conservative. What Republicans did, and let me go back even farther, because look, Republicans are mad at Democrats in the Bush years because Democrats were filibustering lower court nominees largely on the basis of judicial philosophy. There's also the Miguel Estrada example, which Republicans argue you did this because he's Latino. You didn't want us to have a Latino poised to be the first Supreme Court Latino justice. And Democrats said, well, we want to see his records when he was Assistant Solicitor General. You're not giving them to us. And then when Harry Myers came up from Bush for Supreme Court, conservatives said, we want to see her records. We wanted to see her records from being White House counsel. And Bush said, I'm not going to give those to you either. And then she got ditched. Everyone moves the goalpost. But my point is, Democrats were relatively selective in how many nominees they were trying to block. It wasn't a blanket filibustering. They blocked 10 nominees, lower court nominees in the first term. And then the second term, there were 5 at play that were being blocked when the Gang of 14 swooped in which were 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats, and said, okay, we're going to let 3 of these judges through. 2 of them we still think are too extreme. And then after this point, no filibustering except for extraordinary circumstances. And we don't consider judicial philosophy to be an extraordinary circumstance. And then Graham kept going on about Janice Rogers Brown. She made the cut in the Gang of 14 deal. And when Bush got Supreme Court opening soon after that, and Graham was quoting Biden saying she would get filibustered. Sure, Biden said that, but the Gang of 14 said judicial philosophy was non-extraordinary circumstance, and you wouldn't, and so there was no commitment of those Democrats to filibuster her, and that could have been sufficient to get her through. But she wasn't nominated. Bush didn't want to nominate her and go through that process. But my point is that, look, Democrats did pick their spots, but at the end of Bush's 8 years, Bush came in, I think he came in with about 81 judicial vacancies, and he left with, I think it was 54, something like that. So he made ground in the process. He got fewer total judges than Clinton got, but he still was able to whittle down the number of vacancies. I mean, there's always churn with the vacancies. People die, people retire. So you never really get to 0. But he was down. So Obama comes in with about 54 vacancies. And when Republicans have the means, they block just about everybody. And there's data on this, because in Obama's second term, the reason why the nuclear option happened was because Obama had 4 vacancies on the D.C. circuit, which is considered the second most powerful court. And so if he gets all of them, Democrats have a big majority on that court. Republicans let 1 through, and then they say, you don't get the other 3. We're not going to let you pack the court. They literally said that you're packing the court if you're filling vacancies. And Grassley even authored a bill to reduce the number of people on the court, which is like reverse court packing. So you just don't get them. Now, of course, the bill didn't pass, but they were blocking the nominees outright. It doesn't matter who they are. And that's when Harry Reid said, screw this. You're not going to take away our ability to literally appoint anybody. So we're going to go nuclear, change the rules on a straight majority vote, and say there's no more filibustering for lower court nominees. Then Obama gets a real spike in confirmations for 2 years. Then Republicans take the Senate, and that spigot just gets shut off. Obama literally had a 90% confirmation rate, 2013, 2014. That goes down to 28% in the last 2 years. And so Obama leaves Trump with 105 vacancies. He gives Trump almost double the number of vacancies than he came in with, because Republicans were just blocking, with blanket obstruction. And so it wasn't smearing people. There was no sexual misconduct charges. There weren't pedophilia sympathizer charges. It's just, you just don't get them. You just don't get the seats. So what's worse here? What is the nastier tactic? You might say it's more personally egregious to go after a single person like Brett Kavanaugh, especially if you don't believe the charges were credible in the first place. But as far as like the net impact of the judiciary, Republicans have played, I'm not saying they broke the law. I'm not even saying they violated the Constitution, but they played bigger hardball to deny Democrats open vacancies, and they got, mostly on the Supreme Court, now have, the whip hand on the Supreme Court, by a healthy margin. So that's why I feel the Graham narrative leaves out a whole lot of what has gone down.
All right, man. We've convinced me that both sides suck and it's all bad. But we already knew that.
Wait. Here's my silver lining with it, though. Okay. I've been, an annoying pro-filibuster guy, for a while, but I don't feel the same way when it comes to judicial filibusters, because over time, that pendulum swings back and forth. So right now, Trump got a lot of judges for a one-termer, but he's a one-termer. So he didn't get to, his dominance of the judiciary below the Supreme Court is not, I don't even think he got a majority at the end of the day of the total judiciary. He made up a lot of ground, but now Biden's got vacancies to play with. And so he's padding those totals now. So I think at this point, Democrats have more total lower court judges and have a slight edge on the circuit courts as far as like majorities of each circuit court. And I think Republicans have made ground over the past decades, but Democrats still have a slight edge there. However, what you get in a post-nuclear world is more ideological judges on both sides because there's no incentive to find the middle ground judge. You don't get a lot of Merrick Garlands in the mix. And so how the lower courts rule is going to be wildly different depending on like what judge you get. Or some people will go judge shopping, try to get the favorable judge. So that's not going to change. We're going to get, left judges and right judges for some time. But I do think on the whole, it's going to be a wash, and maybe someday the stars are going to align a certain way where we get a 5-4 court again. That's more ideologically balanced, but it just depends on, who retires and who dies and who's in charge at the given time. And that's my optimistic take. My pessimistic take is that I think Roe's going down this summer, and that's going to be just a massive wound on the body politic. It's going to be harder for people to look at the long run.
All right.
I don't know if you saw. Did you see Amy Coney Barrett's comments yesterday?
No.
So she seems to choose the worst venues for these comments. She goes to the Mitch McConnell Center and says, "Hey, we're not all partisan hacks." And so she goes to the Ronald Reagan Library yesterday, and this is how the LA Times described it. Speaking at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, Barrett appeared to acknowledge that expected court decisions on reproductive rights and gun control would be seen through a political lens, lead to more division in a nation splintered by partisanship and racked by incivility. She urged Americans to, quote, read the opinion, quote unquote, and consider the court's reasoning before making judgments about the outcome. Quote, does it read like something that's purely results driven and designed to impose the policy preferences of the majority? Or does it read like it is actually an honest effort and persuasive effort, even if one you ultimately don't agree with, to determine what the Constitution and precedent requires? I mean, it's like telling a kid, like, just try the Brussels sprouts. You're gonna like it. You're gonna like my steamed Brussels sprouts. It's gonna.
I stan Amy Coney Barrett. So you had me at Ronald. You had me at Ronald Reagan.
Because you stan Amy Coney Barrett because Donald Trump ran in 2016 and said, "Here's my list of judges that I'm going to appoint, and I pledge to you they will overturn Roe v. Wade." How can I not look at a decision that his judge is right to overturn Roe v. Wade and not assume it was results driven? He made the open pledge in the campaign.
I don't care about Donald Trump. I mean, judges Trump nominated have ruled against his wishes. I mean, when
it comes to his political fortunes. You
got to realize this is a case where like Donald Trump did something I like, which is very rare. Like if I had to take all the bad stuff from Donald Trump, I'm gonna at least enjoy something good that might come from it. So I'm totally ACB 24/7.
I do think it's intellectually interesting to have six conservative judges, because we see sometimes that they don't align. And we had a case a few days ago where 3, including Barrett, joined the 3 liberals. I think it was some kind of Fourth Amendment, search and seizure kind of thing, if I remember correctly. So like the 6 are not always aligned, and I think,
but the liberals almost always are.
Well, that's not necessarily true. Sometimes you get 9-0 opinions that lean right sometimes.
I know, but they're aligned, right? They're aligned on, like.
I'd have to go back. I'm sure there's some times where that block has splintered, but they don't always do the hard left thing all the time. Democrats really have not picked like the wildest, craziest left wing judge, that is out there. Your RBG had a very moderate criminal justice record. One of the reasons why Orrin Hatch supported her. But I think that in a lot of cases, Barrett, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch are looking at things with, fresh eyes and coming to their own conclusions. And they've gone different ways on different things. I do not have that confidence when it comes to Roe. Not at all. Everything that's happened to date leads me to believe that Trump's explicit pledge to find judges to overturn Roe has been fulfilled. And I mean, maybe they'll just gut it with the Mississippi thing. You can do 15 weeks and not obliterate entirely, but it's obviously going to be part of a long-term range plan to have it be, incinerated later. That just seems like it's just staring us in the face.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would argue it's not because they had an agenda to get rid of Roe and then reverse engineered rationale to do it, but that it was a bad decision, and that they're going to do the right thing.
Well, they identify people who think it's a bad decision and put them on the court.
Yeah, it's hard to, at some point, it becomes a circular argument. But and anyway, stopping infanticide is of all the horrible things happening in the world today. Overturning Roe is not the top of my list of things to be worried about, and in fact, I think it might be one of the only positive things to happen in a long time.
Well, this assumes that it's actually going to reduce the number of abortions, and it's not just going to be done through pills and traveling state lines. But be that as it may,
let's not get started on that.
Always good to talk to you, Matt Lewis in the DMZ. Hopefully we can talk next week.
You got it. Follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show, and we'll see you back here, hopefully, in the DMZ next week.
Plugs?
I have been, I have not been I've been lazy, but I am working on a groomers piece right now. So check it out. It'll be in the Daily Beast.
All righty. And I talked about some of it here. I have a piece in the works about Graham and the judicial process. It's not up yet, but hopefully later this week. And I had a couple pieces. Actually, had a few pieces since we last talked. I reviewed the book Flipped by Greg Bluestein, which is a book about how Democrats won Georgia in 2020. I reviewed that book for the Washington Monthly. And something else in the Monthly. What the hell was it? I did a whole piece on the Postal Service reform bill that passed. One of the great bipartisan successes of the last year plus. And
damn you with your clickbait, Bill. All these clickbait pieces.
And I interviewed Porter McConnell, who is a major progressive activist and was very involved in the Postal Service bill, who happens to be Mitch McConnell's daughter. And so it was fun to sort of connect those dots, because Mitch McConnell had a role in the Postal Service process too. And I did a piece for Real Clear Politics on Joe Biden's gaffe and how it doesn't look so much like a gaffe a week out. It's not like we've started World War III in the past week. Putin had to get out of Kiev. So check that at Real Clear Politics.
All right, will do. See you guys hopefully next week.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye-bye.